The Israeli military campaign in Lebanon is not only intensifying, it has also sparked outrage following an attack on the UN peacekeeping force bases. The airstrikes carried out in southern Lebanon, close to the border with Israel, are a breach of international humanitarian law. That's what Andrea Tenenti, a spokesperson for the forces, has said. The peacekeeping forces in Lebanon are known as the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL. Asked if it was a war crime, the spokesperson said UNIFIL is still looking into that, but it's definitely a very serious development and a very serious violation. According to the spokesperson, there were several attacks in recent days with 2 people injured on Thursday. He added it looks more of a deliberate attack against our troops who have been in the south to try to bring back stability, and it's a very challenging situation. Tenenti asked, how can this be a mistake from an army that is pretty well prepared and they know what they're doing? The explosions close to an observation tower are being investigated. The Israeli military says it had asked UN peacekeepers last week to prepare to pull back from the border, but UNIFIL refused to do so. Asked if he thinks that Israel is trying to force the peacekeepers to go, the spokesperson said, of course, people can analyze it in this way. He added that the United Nations has no plans to evacuate any of its 29 posts close to the blue line, which is the UN-recognized demarcation line between Israel and Lebanon. The attacks have caused an international outcry. The UK government says it is appalled by these attacks. Concerns are mounting for the safety of the UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon. That's what UN peacekeeping chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix has said. Briefing the UN Security Council, UN Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, Lacroix described hostilities between Israeli forces and Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah as increasingly alarming and putting peacekeepers at serious risk. The safety and security of peacekeepers is now increasingly in jeopardy, Lacroix said. UN peacekeepers have been stationed in southern Lebanon since 2006 as per a mandate by the United Nations Security Council. UN peacekeepers were drawn from armies of several nations, including India, to monitor the situation along the roughly 120-kilometer blue line, which, as we said, separates Israel from Lebanon. The injury of the UN peacekeepers has drawn condemnation from several countries, including Italy, France and Ireland, who all have contingents in the US peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni summoned the Israeli ambassador in Rome after what she described as unacceptable behavior by the Israeli forces. The Italian leader also contacted Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to firmly remind him that what is happening near the Italian UNIFIL bases in southern Lebanon is simply unacceptable. Indonesia's mission to the United Nations blasted Israel over what it called deliberate attacks, saying Israel's actions represent a blatant attempt to spread terror on the ground to intimidate both the peacekeeping mission and the international community. France has expressed deep concern after the attack, saying it was awaiting explanations from the Israeli authorities. The protection of peacekeepers is an obligation imposed on all parties to a conflict. France calls on the parties to respect this obligation and to allow UNIFIL to continue to implement its mandate, including by respecting its freedom of movement. That's what a spokesperson for the French Foreign Ministry has said. Irish Foreign Minister Michael Martin described the IDF's targeting and firing on UNIFIL positions as reprehensible and unacceptable. Earlier this week, Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris also expressed concern after Israeli tanks were stationed close to a UN outpost manned by Irish peacekeepers. The European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, has condemned what he called an inadmissible act. He posted on social media, and I quote, "Another line has been dangerously crossed in Lebanon. IDF shelling of UN peacekeepers whose positions are known. We condemn this inadmissible act for which there is no justification." The EU Foreign Policy Chief reiterated his support for UNIFIL and called for full accountability regarding the incident. Meanwhile, rescue workers are searching through rubble after 2 Israeli airstrikes hit central Beirut on Thursday. Lebanon's health ministry says the attacks, which came without any warning, killed at least 22 people and left almost 120 others injured. Israel has said Hezbollah fired more than 190 projectiles from Lebanon into Israel yesterday. Remember, there's also the looming threat of an Israeli attack on Iran in retaliation for last week's Iranian missile strike. Gulf states are now lobbying Washington to stop Israel from attacking Iran's oil sites because they are concerned that their own oil facilities could come under fire from Tehran's proxies if the conflict escalates. As part of their attempts to avoid being caught in the crossfire, Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, are also refusing to let Israel fly over their airspace for any attack on Iran and have conveyed this to Washington. Israel has promised Iran will pay for its missile attack last week, while Tehran has said any retaliation would be met with vast destruction, raising fears of a wider war in the region that could suck in the United States. The moves by the Gulf states come after a diplomatic push by non-Arab Shiite Iran to persuade its Sunni Gulf neighbors to use their influence with Washington amid rising concerns that Israel could target Iran's oil production facilities or worse, its nuclear installations. In a 30-minute phone conversation on Wednesday night, US President Joe Biden is believed to have told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to attack any of Iran's nuclear sites or oil facilities. US Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has said de-escalation is what is needed in the Middle East.
A UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon says Israeli forces fired on its positions on Wednesday and Thursday. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, says 2 of its peacekeepers were injured when an Israeli tank fired at its main headquarters in Nakura. Israel has been pursuing a widening offensive against Hezbollah in that area. A UN source said there were no casualties in 2 other incidents. UNIFIL spokesperson Andrea Tenenti.
This is highly concerning, not only because peacekeepers are there, but because this was done by, most probably a deliberate attack against our troops, which is a violation or a grave violation of international humanitarian law.
Italy has protested to Israel over the incident. Its defense minister called it illegal and a possible war crime.
We asked for the reason why these shots were fired, and we expected to know them officially. The ambassador was not able to provide us with explanations.
Israel has warned Lebanese civilians not to return to homes in the south as it presses on with its assault. On Thursday night, Israeli strikes on central Beirut killed several people and wounded dozens of others, Lebanon's health ministry said. A security source said at least one senior Hezbollah figure was targeted in the attacks.
The 2 soldiers that were wounded were Indonesian. They belong to ASEAN. And obviously, I condemn the fact that there was shooting against the UN premise, wounding 2 peacekeepers, which is a violation of international humanitarian law. Peacekeepers must be protected by all parties of the conflict. And what has happened is obviously condemnable. There was naturally a reaction from many sides in solidarity with the peacekeepers that were wounded and in telling Israel very clearly that this incident is intolerable and it cannot be repeated.
The attack on UNIFIL, United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, forces by Israel is a crime condemned by us and is directed at the international community, whose sanctity is being violated and whose existence is being threatened by targeting the United Nations security forces. 139 people martyred, including 22 civilians killed yesterday. So this issue is completely unacceptable. Where is the humanity and where is the reality we are living in?
We continue to operate against the enemy and will not stop until we ensure that we can safely return the residents, evacuated from the north, not just now, but with a future outlook. If anyone considers rebuilding these villages again, they will know that it's not worth constructing terrorist infrastructure because the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, will neutralize them again.
The UN peacekeeping forces coming under Israeli attack in Lebanon. This is an incident that has sparked international outrage. Where does this conflict go from here?